If I told you the government once kidnapped children to weaponize their psychic abilities, training them underground to open portals, summon creatures from other dimensions, and even bend time itself, you'd probably think I was describing a hit Netflix sci-fi series. But what if I told you that series was inspired by real alleged experiments, a story buried beneath decades of cover-ups, recovered memories, and classified projects? Tonight we're diving into the chilling accounts of how Stranger Things might be more real than we thought, and how a sleepy New York military base and horrifying warship became the center of one of the most disturbing government conspiracies ever whispered about. Let's get into the Montauk Project and the Philadelphia experiment. In 1942, Camp Hero was created in a harbor in New York. This was the government facility that was made for World War II and eventually used to monitor equipment and war attacks from opposing countries during the Cold War. This was equipped with weapons as well as underground tunnels that the government would use to monitor the water as well as the sky. And this pretty much protected the area for quite some time until the early 1960s. Countries at that time started producing something called ICBM, in other words, intercontinental ballistic missiles. These missiles could reach countries in literal minutes and sometimes much faster than that, which of course made Camp Hero pretty much useless because even if they would detect something within minutes, they would not be able to respond fast enough anyway. So of course, once this type of equipment started to be utilized by other countries, the government essentially abandoned Camp Hero altogether. The abandoned facility starts to look a little bit more similar to what we start to see in Stranger Things, but it gets much stranger. From about 1981 to about 1983, the area was completely not used officially, but many eyewitnesses noticed the government facilities were still in that area, watching it and monitoring it. The area was not radioactive, nor did it have any weapons still in there, and any weapons that were not able to be used, they were deactivated. So many questioned why they would still see military authorities walking around late at night or sometimes during the day, going in and out, as well as closing off the area entirely. This was all going on despite the government saying that this area was supposed to be completely vacant and abandoned and no one was using it. In the late 1980s, a man named Preston B. Nichols decided to expose something that left the world completely turning pale white, and began to have flashes of memories that he did not remember ever experiencing, nor would it ever make sense that he would experience this. He talked about having memories of psychological phenomena, things that he could not explain, and just overall very weird situations that were invading his thoughts and memories. A lot of these memories were very scattered and they were not put into a cohesive story, so they made no sense. He mentioned deciding to go and seek psychological help, to which he was able to recover huge chunks of memories that were completely lost. He claimed to have been working on something called the Montauk Project. He claimed that it was a classified project that explored mind control, electromagnetic manipulation, and yes, time travel. While all of this would be most unsettling, he said the most unsettling thing that he discovered was that the point of this project was to control human behavior. Nichols claimed to have been in Camp Hero and remembered these large rooms and a lot of the imagery that Camp Hero was eventually seen to have. Remember, at this point, people have not actually been inside Camp Hero, and they could not actually say what the inside looked like. So the only point of reference was from Nichols himself, and a lot of people said it eventually matched up well with what was actually seen in the camp. But all of this does not pale in comparison to the most disturbing thing that Nichols ever mentioned, and he said it over and over again, which was a chair. The chair was believed to have coils pointed directly at the chair and resembled a dentist's chair. The chair was also made small for children, and it had a helmet, in which the subject would be able to sit on the chair with the helmet, and the helmet had the same coils that all attached to the chair. It's all important to note that around this time when Nichols had spoken about this chair, it wasn't as if sci-fi movies had depicted something like this. This was the first time that any of this stuff was ever being mentioned, so this was something that clearly just popped in his head all by himself. Nichols describes the chair as being used for kids who had some sort of psychic ability already, and the chair would enhance that ability. He spoke about how the chair would allow people to manifest their thoughts, so whichever being or figure they thought of, they would be able to physically have that version in front of them. So if they imagined a deadly creature that has their face opened up, that creature would appear in front of the kid. Nichols also mentions the ability to time travel and open a portal in which it would allow whoever to go through that portal to jump time periods. Nichols discussed astral projection, in which the kid would sit in the chair and would be able to project himself outside of the chair and see what's going on either in the lab or in the outside world. In season 1, episode 6 of Stranger Things, named The Bathtub, The episode goes through moments where they talk about a Delta T chair that would amplify psychic ability. What becomes a little bit more unsettling than what is in the show is that the kids that were taken, that were put into this chair, were either never seen again, or when they were seen again, they had completely lost their memory of them being in that chair, or had their personalities completely change afterwards. The teens that were kidnapped were usually anywhere between 11 to 16, and they always kept getting younger as the government officials believed younger minds were more easily manipulated, and that their psychic ability could be better harnessed, as well as they could be taught to be more useful. After all of this, the boys would return back to their normal lives with memory erasure. In August 1983, that was when it was believed Camp Hero had to shut down completely. A boy named Duncan Cameron was put onto the chair, and he had manifested a horrible creature. The creature could not be controlled inside the lab, and they ultimately had to destroy the chair as well as destroy the lab to make the monster go away. And that is when ultimately the facility was sealed up altogether and was never used again. But this doesn't just stop here. It coincides with another conspiracy theory called the Philadelphia experiment. A warship called the USS Eldridge, described as a Canyon-class destroyer escort, served primarily to do escort duties in World War II to protect Allied ships from submarines. In 1943, at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, sailors allegedly activated huge generators on the USS Eldridge to create green fog and electromagnetic field around the destroyer. The ship supposedly vanished for minutes, reappeared 200 miles away in Norfolk, Virginia, then jumped back, ripping holes in reality. The crew suffered gruesome injuries, some fused to the metal deck, others burned alive or went insane from the dimensional jumping. A few teleported into walls or bars, and this was all told apparently by witnesses. It wasn't even some of the survivors initially. Now fast forward back to the 1980s, there was a man named Al Bilek. Bilek was an electric engineer and lived a pretty normal life, but things got really strange when he started to claim that he was receiving memories from the Philadelphia experiment, and his real name was actually someone named Edward Cameron, and his brother was named Duncan Cameron, the same one that was believed to be in the chair in Camp Hero. Keep in mind, Nichols wrote the book about Camp Hero a few years later after this, and when Al or Edward came out about all of this, this was before the book was made, and it was before any of this information was widely known. So he was regurgitating a Duncan before he even knew that Duncan was part of that other story. Edward then continued his story talking about how right after the Philadelphia experiment went awry, him and Duncan jumped off the ship at the last minute. And instead of jumping into straight water, they jumped into a time vortex to where they jumped into 2137. He describes underground bunkers and pretty much the world being in really bad shape, as well as him and Duncan being in really bad shape, to which they were found in the emergency room. They were being treated for radiation, I assume from the electromagnetic things, as well as the ship, as well as the green gas, and stranger things did occur. As when they were cured or got better, they were told that they could not stay in that year, but instead of being sent back, they were then brought to 2749, to which they describe a completely dystopian world where cities were floating, and I imagine very cyberpunk-like, pretty much what Elon Musk wants. They apparently lived there for several years before they were then officially sent back to the 1980s, in which they went to stop both projects, and they essentially ended both, to which he claimed his memory was then wiped out after that. It's of course very important to note that there's no scientific or crucial piece of evidence that would prove either of these stories correct. There's no photos, there's only stories being told, which of course would make sense considering they claim to have stopped both of these things, so it makes sense that in our timeline these things wouldn't have existed then. And while I haven't seen the end of Stranger Things yet, I imagine the ending might tie up in a similar kind of way. But while there's no solid piece of evidence that can corroborate their story, many people have visited Camp Hero and have documented strange situations, such as their equipment not fully functioning when they're inside, as well as going in for what seemed like 5 minutes and coming out and realizing 3 hours had passed. While those who went in never claimed to see a chair, I guess that makes sense since it was seemingly destroyed. They also claimed to never see any of the equipment that was mentioned in the stories. However, they did find a lot of sealed off rooms. And I think it's absolutely genius to base a show like Stranger Things on this. And interestingly enough, they were actually initially going to call the show Montauk, but eventually went with a different name. But I would love to know if you were around or from any of those time periods, did you experience anything strange? Did you notice any kids or people that went missing that were found later and pretty much had no story to tell?